Hello, Africa. Welcome to another episode of 1000 African Voices. Today, I'm really happy to go back to Kampala, Uganda, where we're joined by Mr. Brian Tuyabaje, all the way, as I said, from Kampala. Will shortly introduce himself to our listeners. Hi, Brian.
Hi there. Hi, all.
Hi, how is Kampala today?
Kampala is doing fine. Quite sunny here, and it's a calm environment. I believe every one of you, if you came this side, you'd enjoy it. So it's a good place.
Okay, let's talk a bit about that. Why do you think we would enjoy Kampala? So where I am, it's about 24 degrees Celsius. What's the temperature more or less now in Kampala, sort of roughly?
Average is 25 degrees Celsius as well. But I think what we are better on mostly is on the hospitality bit. So leave on the temperatures and stuff, but the people within Kampala, I think they would give you a good welcome within the city.
Okay. So, all right. I quite like that. So Brian, so you invented something. So we're going to talk about that quite a bit. However, we'll take advantage of being able to talk to someone who is in Kampala, as someone who is relatively young, but perhaps just to give our listeners and viewers a sense of first what you do, and later we'll go to who you are. Can you talk about your invention just a bit before the rest of the conversation unfolds?
Okay. So me and my team at Mama Open Medicals, we invented a biomedical smart jacket called the Mama Op that is targeted to diagnosis of pneumonia. And our aim was to reduce the disease of pneumonia, especially the fact that it spreads and kills a lot of children. That is the under 5. At the moment, it is still considered and regarded as the leading child killer disease. So the Mama Op jacket was invented with an aim of reducing on that whole lot or that whole number of deaths that we always see on a day-to-day basis within Africa, and especially Sub-Saharan Africa and even Southeast Asia. Yeah, so that's something we've been working on for quite some time now, me and my team. And yeah, it would be interesting for all of us to check it out, especially once we get to hit the markets outside even Uganda. And where we're at right now, of course, we've been in several rounds of clinical trials, but I believe at any one time we'll be able to see the actual device within our hospital settings, and it will be doing a lot great more work within our lives.
And yeah. I mean, Brian, as an inventor, there are so many other different things that you could have been focusing on. Why do you care so much about pneumonia? What's so important about pneumonia within the context of Kampala, Uganda?
So the invention came at a time when we wanted to make a big difference within our country, to start within our communities. And we looked around. Unfortunately, at that point in time, it is when one of our colleagues had lost her grandmom due to pneumonia. What we found challenging rather was that this is someone who had gone through several clinics. And whenever they were trying to diagnose her of the disease, they would check for malaria, they would give her treatment for malaria, until when she was on her deathbed, that reports came out indicating that she had died of pneumonia. Being engineering students at that point in time, when we were at our university, that is Makerere University, we thought through it and we were like, we think there could be better ways of managing such cases. What if we could develop like a standard, or maybe like a more automated process that can avoid, or maybe they can help these health workers and doctors at rural levels avoid that whole guesswork of just treating things as if it's malaria. And that's when the thought came through of we could actually use our engineering knowledge to automate or to develop a tool that could be used by almost every other clinician, every other physician, to get this right, not just get it wrong. And in the long run, they can actually save many more cases. And that's a point we try to dig around to look for more information regarding the actual severity of the disease and how bad it is within Africa. And that's when statistics came to our surprise that pneumonia on its own was actually killing more children than other diseases like malaria, diarrhea, and even HIV/AIDS combined. It might sound as simple, but if you look at it in terms of statistics, it makes up to a number of 2,500 children who die every day just because of this disease. And that means like almost every 40 seconds, a child is just dying on this show, just been speaking for about 5 minutes. That could mean more than 7 kids already dead just because of a disease as simple as pneumonia, which surprisingly is treatable with very simple antibiotics when detected early. And that's why we focused all our efforts at that point of, can we develop something that can help in early detection and diagnosis of the disease, so that most of these cases which are dying, perhaps they're innocent cases, we can actually save a lot more of them. And that's what kind of motivated us. It's what gave us the push to take the clock and start inventing towards that whole sector. So that's how we got into that.
When you hear numbers, it's really difficult to put those numbers into context. But when you said that in the time that we've been talking, in the last 5 minutes, we have essentially lost 7 lives somewhere. When you put it like that, then I think it gives a lot of context to the conversation. So obviously the significance of the work that you do comes to the fore immediately. Like, I get it. I mean, if in the time that I'm talking, and I'm sure by now that number has risen to 8 or 9 kids across the African continent, then I start to understand it. How does it actually work? So as I was preparing for that, I read that the detection or the success of your technology is 4 times better at detecting signs of pneumonia than a trained physician. Can you maybe just talk to us about how the whole technology works? How is it so much more effective in relation to someone who's been trained for 7 to 10 years on detecting pneumonia?
Yeah, so for starters, when we're developing the technology, we mimicked or we focused more on what happens in the current settings in a hospital. We literally did studies whereby we had to follow up a number of health workers and a number of doctors. And to sort of maybe get it back into context, our focus is more on the health workers, on the physicians who work mostly in the remote areas whereby there's less access to standardized technology such as X-rays or ultrasound. So the idea is that these are people who have been trained, but perhaps not for quite some time. So they have basic skills, they have basic knowledge of how to diagnose diseases like pneumonia or malaria. And these are people who are faced mostly with these cases because they are located where most of these patients are coming in such cases. So what we did, we followed up trained doctor, trained pediatricians in this case, people who are able to diagnose pneumonia on a day-to-day basis. And we followed through what exactly they always speak out in terms of what signs and symptoms are critical to measure. But even when you get into the signs, which of those signs do these health workers or these doctors face more difficulties with while trying to measure? A case in point is there's a common tool we always see with doctors, which is the stethoscope. And whenever everyone gets into a hospital, it is something they will place into the chest to try to listen to the breathing patterns or any other heart patterns, whatever the kind it is. And we found that surprisingly, someone who is trained can get it right. But if you give the same stethoscope still to 3 people, whichever level of training they have, one of them will not get the exact result that the other person has been able to obtain. So there's a bit of human error that always varies from person to person or from physician to physician. Secondly, even when you get to more rudimentary ways in terms of people who have basic knowledge, the people who are at these remote health centers, they don't have enough training or enough knowledge to get the right interpretation out of it. So at times the tool might be able to do its measurements, but then they are unable to figure out the output in the way it should be figured out. So much as they're using the same tools, they end up giving wrong results, wrong prescriptions, and wrong medications, which increases the entire burden. So what we did to stop all that kind of process was that, one, if we can get this kind of tool, if we can mimic whatever is happening, but in addition to that, be able to give a more meaningful display to these doctors, then it can first of all cut out the error of misinterpretation by perhaps several people. And on top of that, even now, someone with basic skills of diagnosis, that is someone who is able to just place a stethoscope onto someone's chest, they can just place it there and then they should be able to be helped to make the interpretation instead of them having to listen and figure out the patterns. The commonest challenge that we even faced when we were trying out some of these things, that when you put a stethoscope into your ears for quite some time, it tends to make the ears tend to hurt. So you can imagine if someone is looking at about 100 cases of children in a day, trust me, they will get it wrong at some point. But now with our automated tool, it perhaps will not feel the same pain that maybe a person's ear would feel, but rather will keep on showing the exact same display or with the same exact right results that you expected to see as a doctor or as a physician. So that's how we're able to overcome some of the common human mistakes or the common human errors that we face on a day-to-day basis. And on top of that, we focus more on the low remote areas in a way that we wanted to make it a bit cheaper so that it can easily spread out to most of the communities that we are faced with on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, that's a journey we've been able to move, and that's how we were able to make our tool a bit faster to achieve that. Maybe one more extra point is that one of our other design kind of patterns was that when someone is diagnosing like such breathing rate related diseases or respiratory diseases, they have to listen to several points on a person's chest. And that means that every time they point one particular position, they would have to listen for quite some time, whether 30 seconds or even 1 minute. But now the way we designed our tool is that it's able to touch all those several points at a single instance. That is to say, it ends up cutting up that whole repetitive pattern of having to listen to 1, second, third position, even the fourth position all at once. So those are some of the ways we've been able to mimic and perhaps overcome the challenge of having to diagnose the disease for quite some time. That's how our tool becomes a bit faster than what a normal human can be able to achieve.
All right, I mean, we're going to revisit the technology itself, but perhaps at this point, our viewers or the audience will be wondering, maybe first, what you studied. So you talked about Makerere University early on, Makerere being one of the top universities on the continent, not only within sub-Saharan Africa, but across the continent as a whole. Can you maybe talk to us a bit about what you studied?
Yeah, so my education was in a course called telecommunications engineering. That was my bachelor's degree, to which right now I'm actually doing even a master's in that same course. And literally what we covered within that course that relates exactly with the kind of technology that we're building. There are concepts around engineering in terms of how you get to design medical equipment, how you get to design engineering equipment for starters. But on top of that, how it relates with the whole concept of you can automate the process of getting signals from our human body. By signals, I'm meaning data. And whatever data you get, it is what you can actually process to get meaningful results out. Needless to say, it was not only the course that gave me that kind of big push, but rather other additional skills. We were fortunate enough that during our time, there was a presidential initiative that was always that was designed to look out for the brightest students across the engineering courses, the top engineering courses, which is telecom engineering, computer engineering, and electrical engineering. And what they would do is that they would put us together under that research group, which was called iLabs at Makerere. And within that iLabs group, the task was simple. They would train us with additional programming skills, which we would use with our engineering skills to develop tools for our communities. So by then our target is that we would look at several sectors like agriculture, like the transport sector, and every other sectors to come up with innovations with whatever knowledge we had. And that was like a foundation that kind of gave us a big push to even start daring for issues that were like in the health sector or even other sectors as we were studying. So by the time we were finishing campus, we had that kind of background, and that's when the project came up. That's when the first prize money that gave us a push to start it up as a company at that point. And what we quickly had to do was to now start locating and connecting with our friends who were in the medical sector so that they could give us more meaningful knowledge. Because us being from the engineering background, we needed to beef up our understanding with something more practical, something more grounded in terms of the medical field, since we were doing an engineering kind of tool, but that was focused more on the health sector. So that's how we managed to map up our education with what actually we were trying to solve in the field.
All right. I mean, you mentioned that you now busy with your master's. So again, it's quite clear that in relative terms, you're still fairly young. And I mean, on this show specifically, we do advocate for young Africans across the entire continent who are coming up with innovative ways to solve problems that afflict our continent. So I'm quite happy today, actually, to be talking to someone like yourself. Let's talk then about first I mean, to come up with an innovation is one thing, but to build that up into a company is another issue. How have you managed the issue of scaling up so that the solution that you've come up with moves from the realm of sort of your academic world more into the practical space?
One thing I would say is that in my entire time, as we've been moving through the innovation, I must say there's been a lot of contributions from several parties in terms of several contributors have been able to give us knowledge in one or the other. Quite almost important, I think there's been an effort, especially from the incubators and other mentors that we have had to connect with in our journey. Of course, we come from a background whereby maybe we wanted to invent, we wanted to do things. We had all that technology knowledge, but then over time, we realized we really didn't know much to do with company politics and company management, and even how to structure a business that cannot just run for 1 year, but rather for other several years. So the input in terms of our mentors came in handy in a way that they would advise us on how to deal with like our business operations for starters. Secondly, how to deal with, at basic level, how to deal with consultants, or even how we can map our journey in terms of how do we acquire knowledge that is going to be very meaningful to our to our growth in terms of our company, but even in terms of getting different forces to work for what we need to achieve. So it would stem from just simple things like even how you design the product, go on in terms of how do you connect with other several partners within the field so that they can add to your innovation, whatever you want to add. Let it be the software that we use, let it even be the knowledge of using that very software, or even the knowledge of connecting with funders to give us the necessary resources. So there was a lot of input from the mentors, and I think that's one thing you cannot just put aside. Take along even the incubators, because now with the incubators, you get to share and learn a lot from other peer innovators in terms of what they are going through, what they have failed, and you're able to share lessons with one another. The interesting thing with incubators is that for an ecosystem like in Uganda, whereby innovations like ours, who are a bit new to the community, it was very hard to have like a full plan that maps from where you are up to where you expect to be in the market like 5 years from then. So the importance of such a community is that someone who has been able to try out a process, let's say maybe like a clinical trial, or someone's tried to go through the regression process, they end up getting lessons freely, and which they can be able to share with you so that you have a more clearer path. Because on top of just figuring out the technology, they want to add so much burden in terms of also figuring out how to just navigate like your regulatory path, or even how to navigate like the business approvals whenever that time comes. So you find like the more people you can connect with in terms of either partners or in terms of mentors who can direct you, or even in terms of like other peer innovators who can guide you through the same path, it makes your work a bit more easier than you facing it on your own. And of course, the other additional joy is that even you yourself, when you go through a certain challenge and you're able to pick out lessons, it's more joyful for you to just share it with like any other upcoming innovator or any other kind of peer colleague, so that their work is made more easier, and then within a short run, you're able to grow the economy a bit quicker.
How is the startup scene in Kampala specifically? And maybe before you answer that, as I'm asking that, I'm thinking about Addis Ababa and how Ethiopia has positioned the country to support the startup culture. I'm also thinking about how Kenya is supporting its young people who want to start up particularly innovative companies. And just even across the border from yourself, if we go to Dar es Salaam, I think of Silicon Dar, where they really are promoting a startup culture. So if we now come to Kampala, essentially one of the biggest cities across East Africa, how have you found the life of a founder, so to speak, within that ecosystem?
I think if I was to rank it, I wouldn't rank it as one of the easiest. I would say it's moderately okay, perhaps 5 out of 10. That's a quick rating I would give it. And why I'm saying that is that, like at the point when we were starting, it's not like you have the knowledge, first of all. There were not so many like innovators around. So first of all, everything you like have to bootstrap from scratch. You have to think from zero. On top of that, I think that in those years, that's when there was like a boom of so many startups coming up. So even the government, or maybe like the top authorities, which would have been a bit supportive, they are starting to realize something from the start. or they were still seeing them a bit new. And even come to think of it in the health sector, which is a bit more regulated, these are like things that are not so much expected to see or to attempt to hear. And rather than most of these things being embraced, people are actually resisting. People are actually shying away from the fact that other young kids were trying to come up with novel things. So it was a bit hard, and I think it is still a bit moderately hard. What has changed perhaps in the few years, in the past like 3 years, is that we've seen some bit of efforts from the government. Perhaps like one, first of all, they've tried like to set up a bit of funds now to encourage most of these grassroots innovations. Of course, due to COVID, some of those things have come to a standstill. But just before that kind of time, at least there was a bit of efforts. You'd see like they're trying to set up funds, they're trying to set up like innovation centers to encourage and maybe to give a bit of like a supportive hand to most of these institutions. So it is still growing, but I don't think it has matured as the other peer countries that you've mentioned. Perhaps the only difference is that the very people who have been within these startups, they've sort of now like developed a culture whereby they've learned like ways of having to survive, whether without support or not. They've had to figure out ways of maneuvering through that. And good enough is that we've seen a bit of attraction of other foreign investment companies pick more interest. And so whether there is now not much government support available, at least we've seen there's a bit of more support available from these other foreign companies that are starting to set up and identify a bit of founders within the country.
I mean, that's quite encouraging to hear. And I'm hoping, in fact, I do know that it's not only in Kampala, but we're seeing it across East Africa. But essentially, we are seeing it across the African continent, where there is quite a bit of funding that we're starting to get as a continent. So hopefully we'll continue to see more of that. And I think it is through innovations such as yours, where we are able to say, here we are as African innovators. Do you want to invest in this? And obviously, when a product solves particularly a social problem, then it's relatively easy to get funding. Brian, I'm wondering, when you're not thinking about innovation or pneumonia, or you're not thinking about your studies, how is the life of a relatively young person in Kampala? If you can maybe just talk to our viewers about that. Is it a good city to live in as a young person? What's there to do in Kampala?
Yeah, I think Kampala is relatively a good city. First of all, I think, like as I said, it's a bit more hospitable. People tend to have a lot of fun. Of course, now with social media, especially like in the previous lockdowns, people tended to connect a lot on social media. So a lot of stories can be there, and people have a lot of vibe to catch up on. And over time, there's been a bit of groups depending on what someone prefers. So you find like a bit of social groups that are more tied like to particular sectors or maybe particular ways of supporting each other's hustles. And on a relative basis, I think there's a bit more entrepreneurship initiatives that tend to come up out of most of the Ugandans. I don't know whether it's because, overall we know that Africa there's not so much employment, but I think people have tended now to embrace the idea that they have to start up businesses in one way or the other. So whether someone is like in a house and they realize they have a skill like to design something, they start up like a quick startup to, let's say, design up people's houses or maybe do interior designing or quick skills. So I think people are more on the hype of starting up things that they think can actually support them. And because of COVID, of course, people have had to embrace that whole bit because they've seen a bit more money come out of that rather than the other traditional employment. So it's a vibrant scene, and the fact that even most of the universities are located within the central Kampala, you find there's like a lot of youth population, and people tend to gather, people tend to brainstorm on things. Yeah, it's a bit interesting generally. Yeah. So without COVID, I think it would be a bit more booming, and you would be able to see more interesting solutions and ideas coming out of Kampala. Yeah, but of course, right now with COVID, there's a bit of not so much that can be happening, maybe that we'll be able to hear.
I know in Uganda as a whole, it's been an interesting year to say the least. I mean, politically speaking, sort of the change of guard, or what was supposed to be a change of guard, did not really pan out as desired. When I say desired, I mean by certain members of society. But it's been quite interesting to see how the country was able to bounce back from that shortcoming. And I don't want to sound too biased, but one would hope that with time, not only in Uganda, but across the continent, we're going to start seeing the winds of change. And hopefully with that change, we'll see a lot more innovation, a lot more energy. And again, it's not only in Uganda. I've always been quite critical of sort of the average age of an African president. I think we can do better. I think that age will be dropping from the current 70 to a more favorable number, maybe 45 to 50 thereabout. But it has been quite interesting to observe Uganda and see the resilience of Ugandans to sort of survive that and look forward to a better tomorrow. Maybe, Brian, as we are about to wrap up, it's honestly for me, it's been quite interesting to get into the mind of someone who is thinking about innovation all the time, someone who's part of one of Africa's top universities in Makerere, but also someone who's saying there is a social problem within our country. I'm not going to wait for a solution to come from somewhere else. I'm going to contribute to the resolution of the problems that afflict the society that I am part of. So that's been quite encouraging for me to see. But yeah, I don't know, Brian, if there's any last thing that you want to say or share with our viewers before we bid you farewell.
So like you mentioned, I think at the end, even the power of innovation or the power of using whichever tools we have within our hands, I think it can work for the betterment of our societies in whichever way we can. To relate it a bit, maybe with like our political scene, I would think that one of the easiest ways, like for innovators that would have at hand to make such meaningful changes within our communities, is to make such tools which can actually be embraced by the communities. And then over time, it is very easy for you to get like a buy-in from whichever forces. Whether it means you're going to convince like whoever the policymakers are, because they will be able to see that kind of impact that you have at your back. And because they want to make impact to your communities, they will definitely start to rhyme with you, or they'll start to share ideas with you. And you'll find that in the long run, it's easy for you to even have that kind of meaningful impact to your community, just using innovation as a pathway. But now to penetrate into some of these perhaps big offices or these other political sort of tools that can be used actually to aid for the economic growth or maybe the general welfare within our communities. And yeah, of course, to everyone out there, maybe the word of encouragement is that at times innovation has never been easier. At times it's very hard for me to just convince someone or maybe to advise any student out there to just get into innovation, because it can be hard. You can be in moments whereby you feel like there's no way out, or maybe you're almost like getting blocked from going to whichever next station you want to go to. The beauty about it is that every little thing you get to pass through becomes like a foundation. In terms of you're able to easily get like more knowledge and more good foundation to easily approach any other kind of issue, whether it is a life issue, whether it is any other thing even related to your business. So embrace it and keep on in it, and try as much as possible to connect with peers, especially your peer founders, and look out for mentors as much as you can, because they will be able to solve some of the things you ought not to solve on your own. So embrace that kind of thing, and yeah, it will always be right. And to sum it up, I think programs like this, they get to help a lot, especially for the wider community. So we appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Brian. And I do appreciate you making the time to come on 1000 African Voices and share your views, because hopefully, as particularly young people, as they watch you talk about innovation and they watch you talk about life in Kampala and how you are applying your mind to solving social issues, hopefully that will lead to more innovation, not only from Uganda, but across the African continent. So from us, all of us on 1000 African Voices, Brian, I would like to wish you all the best, because I do think that right now in 2021, we can no longer as Africans say, oh, we are in Africa, therefore we can only play within the local space. I think that we have shown that there is capability across the continent to compete on equal footing with just about anyone from anywhere in the world. So Brian, thank you for making the time to come on 1000 African Voices. Thank you. You've expanded my understanding of Uganda. Before this, when I thought of Uganda, I thought Kampala, I thought of the Cranes. And by the way, your soccer team continues to improve. You kind of still need to win the African Championship, but the improvement is there for everyone to see. I thought of Makerere. So thank you for expanding my understanding of Uganda, Kampala, and hopefully our listeners and viewers have sort of had a similar experience. So really thank you for your time.